In this lesson, we're going to be setting up our first camera. It's what's known as a lock-off camera. In other words, it's just as if in the real world you had taken a tripod and a camera, placed it at a particular location, framed the camera, and then locked the camera off, and that becomes your shot. It's the simplest type of camera setup. Before we do that, we need to set our scene up. I've already loaded our asset as before. Here it is with the home view. It's in our scene manager over here. We can see our scene view, and here is the warehouse. And if you remember from an earlier lesson, we now need to make a very important step. We need to set our aspect ratio for our project. This is very important so that when we start working with cameras, our own cameras, and adding them, we're actually working with the output format we're going to use. To do that, I need to set our output format. So I'm going to go up to the render menu, and I'm going to select render video, and down here under full frame, under output size, I'm going to select our HD 720p widescreen format. This is a 16:9 format. Now, although I might not be putting out any stills or images, I'm going to set that format as well, and I can do that in the same dialog just by switching to the image output, and as you can see, by default it's gone back to our 4:3 view. So again, I want to come down here, 720p 16:9, and now when I switch between either of the image output or video output, I have our widescreen HD format ready to go. With all that set, let's do something else that's very sensible. We're actually going to now save our project. Although we haven't done a great deal, it's a very good time always to sort of save your project, give it a name, so that as you go along you can keep updating it and you're not going to lose any work accidentally through a computer failure or anything like that. To save the scene, I'm going to go to the Content Manager, and what we want to do this time is we want to save a project, and the reason for that is that a project saves absolutely everything. If we pop back to the Scene Manager briefly, you'll see that we have a warehouse, our warehouse prop, which is made up of a lot of sub-props. But we also have some lights. We have a basic key light and a rim light. These are the default lights that iClone has for any scene. And if we want to save all this information, and when we start adding cameras, save those as well, we want to save everything in the scene view here. And to do that, we need to save a project. So with the Content tab selected, I'm going to go and select Project. And what's going to happen now is we're going to go back to Custom, and you may remember we have our project called iC6 Camerwork, so we're going to save that into this folder. Here is our previous project that we used for one of the earlier demonstrations. And to save now, all I need to do is click this plus button, but it's very important to make sure you don't have anything selected here. If you have an item selected in this view and you hit the plus button, you'll overwrite this project. It will give you a warning. So let's deselect that. I'm just clicking in the grey area here, and I'm now going to click the plus button, and it'll generate a new project for us with a thumbnail roughly matching this view, and it'll open it and ask us for a name. So let's give this a sensible name. Let's call it Warehouse Intro. I hit the return key there, and our project is saved in the Content Manager. So everything we've done to date is now saved, and if we make any mistakes or anything, we can come back here and reload our project. It'll bring us back to this exact point when we saved it. Now that we've done that, let's set up our first camera. We are currently looking through our preview camera, and as you know, we can tell that by looking up here at the camera pull down. So as before, we're going to go over here to the Create menu, and I'm going to select Add Camera. This will add a camera duplicating the current position that we had with the preview camera. So we now have our camera up here listed, and our Modify panel is now highlighting and showing our camera. And if we switch back to our Scene Manager, we can see that we now have a camera item, and our camera is now listed. And we should rename the camera something sensible as well, just as we did with our project, so that we know what the camera is for. Select the camera item in the Scene Manager, press F2 on the keyboard, and let's call this Cam lock off. So this is going to be our lock off camera. We could of course have named the camera by clicking in this field over here and changing it there as well. Now that we've got the camera named and we've got one in our scene, let's position it for our first shot. Since we've got the camera selected up here, this is actually the view from our camera, and we can manipulate it just by using these tools up here in the toolbar. So for example, if I select the orbit tool, you can see that the camera isn't orbiting anymore. Because we actually are a real camera, it's behaving like a real camera. What you'll notice now is, even though I have the orbit tool selected, if I click on the left mouse button and move up and down, what I'm actually doing is tilting the camera. It's tilting up and down from a point in space like it was on a tripod. Likewise, left and right, move the mouse left and right, it's panning left and right as though it's on a tripod. If I physically want to move the camera in space, I can still use the dolly tool as before, hold the shift key down to accelerate it. I'm now sliding the camera left and right in space and sliding it up and down in space. I can also dolly the camera in towards the objects. So again, I'm now select the dolly tool and I'm dollying the camera in. So using these tools, I'm going to position for our first shot. I'm going to set the camera up so that we can see the door from a low angle. So I'm going to select the pan tool. And as you can see again, hold the shift key down to accelerate. I'm just going to move over here. Holding the shift key down, I'm just dragging with the mouse button to the left. I'm going to dolly in, and then I'm going to tilt the camera up. Look at the door. Might want to tilt up a bit more and then lift the camera. So I'm now holding down the shift key, clicking with the left mouse button and pushing up and down to lower the camera towards the ground. And because I've got this nice tilted up angle looking up at the door, we are starting to get the framing that we want. So I'm holding the shift key down, just going to move over here a bit, go to the orbit tool, and I'm just going to pan around. So I'm now panning the camera on its tripod effectively, framing up on the door. So this is, are going to be our start framing. This is where we're going to start from. There is another way, of course, to manipulate our camera. What we can do is we can switch to the preview camera. So up here, I'm going to select preview. And you may remember the preview camera was back out here originally, so it's still in its original position. And now that I've got the preview camera selected, I'm going to select the pan tool. And I'm going to pan over to the right. And we can actually now see our own camera. Here is cam lock off. And there it is. That's its position, looking up. So if I want to manipulate this camera now, I can simply use the manipulation tools. I'll use the move tool first. And as you can see, I can use the manipulator here, the gizmo, to move my camera around in space this way as well. I'm just going to undo that. And I can also rotate. So if I select the rotate tool, you can see now that I can rotate the camera. However, you will notice that it's not rotating the way you might expect. I'm dragging on the green circle here, and the camera's actually panning. And you'd expect, if I wanted to pan the camera, I'd grab the blue circle on the gizmo and it would pan, but in actual fact it's not doing anything. So let's undo that and have a look at why that issue is occurring. This is all to do with what's known as world coordinate space and object coordinate space. It can be a bit confusing. If we look at our move gizmo, you'll see that these axes here, the red, green and blue axes, are actually lined up with that world axis we talked about in an earlier lesson. And they're matching. And that's because if we look at this tool and click on it, you'll see this little down arrow. You'll see it's set to world move. There is also a local move. And that means that the coordinate system will be local to the object that's selected, in this case our camera. And the same applies to our rotate. If we go to the rotate tool and we click on the down arrow, you'll see that at the moment it's highlighted as world rotate. And to make this work properly for us, we want to be in local rotate mode. However, if we select this right now, this won't work the way we expected either. The reason for this is that when you add a camera in iClone, it comes in with the default behavior. If we go up to the edit menu and go down to the camera option, you'll see this auto level, and it has a tick next to it, which means it's actually on. And this is on by default. So let's untick this and see what happens. So I've now removed that. If we go back to our rotate tool, remember we couldn't alter this blue circle. Click on it and drag, you'll see that I am actually now able to roll the camera. Although this axis doesn't represent really what you expect to be able to roll the camera with. And that again is to do with the local and global coordinate system. Now that we have this auto level feature deselected, let's see what happens when we switch the camera to local coordinates. So here's our local rotate, and now you'll notice that the gizmo has switched, and these axes are now lining up with the angle and tilt that our camera is currently at. And the same applies to the move tool. If I select that and switch that to local mode, you'll now see that instead of the axes lining up to our world coordinate system, the axes are now lining up to the local tilt and angle of the camera. So this is now, for example, our X move. If we switch this back to world move, you can see that the axes now return to obeying the world coordinate system, which is based on that axis we looked at earlier. So if we select our rotate tool in local mode, we will now get the type of behavior we would expect. This is the camera roll, or Dutch as it's known. Here is our tilt. The camera is now tilting the way we expect. Finally, we can pan the camera. Again, everything's now working the way we'd expect. So to make things a bit easy for us, I'm simply going to set some of these parameters down here to make sure our camera is nice and level. To give ourselves a good starting position, I'm simply going to set our X rotate to 90. So that will level the camera along the X-axis. And then because I've done that, I'm now going to just zero out these other two axes. That has straightened the camera up. You can see the Dutch or roll has been removed. And finally, if I want, I can zero out the Z. Now I have the camera at a very level setting, and I can pan it now just as I would. And I know that I've got a level camera because, as you can see down here, this value is not changing. I'm simply panning the camera left or right. Likewise, if I only use this axis here, I can tilt the camera just as I have before. I'm not going to manipulate the roll because in cinematic terms, roll or Dutching the camera is not used that often. It's used for a creative effect, and you only ever really use it for a very good reason. Generally, we are not going to use it, certainly not for this particular scene, because we want a very simple locked off camera framed and looking up at our door. Now that we've done that, we can actually switch back to seeing through our actual camera and seeing what we now see, having manipulated it using the move and rotate tools up here on the toolbar. This is now the new view that I've got by manipulating the camera. So again, if I want to make further adjustments, I can simply now, with this view selected, which is looking through my actual camera, I can still make modifications using the tools up here in the toolbar. Once we have the camera where we want it, we're going to lock it off. We said it was going to be a lock-off camera. It's like we've put it on a tripod, we've framed up the shot that we want. There's no need to move the camera during operation. So to lock the camera, we're going to come up here, and there's two ways to lock the camera. We can look over in the scene manager, and there's this little padlock icon. If we click on that, this will actually now lock the camera, and you'll notice the tools up here are grayed out. I can no longer move or manipulate the camera in the viewport. You'll also notice in the modify panel, which is now adjusted, you'll see that it says lock camera view is now ticked. I can untick that. This is exactly the same as using the padlock over here in the scene manager. You can also click on here to lock the camera. We can further prove the camera's locked by switching to our preview view. Here is our camera. I'm going to select the manipulate tool, select our camera over here in the scene manager, and even though our manipulate tool has become visible on our camera, if we actually click on any of the axes and try to move, you'll see nothing happens. That is because we've locked the camera. And this is a very good thing to do with cameras when you finish working with them. If you know you're not going to want to work with the camera again, you don't wish the camera to be accidentally moved by anybody, then it's a very good idea to lock the camera so it can no longer be adjusted by anybody. And that's exactly what we've done here. Let's switch back to the camera view, our actual lock-off camera, and let's save our scene. We've done all this work, we don't wish to use it, so I'm now going to select the Content Manager. It's still set to our folder here. Here is our warehouse intro project we saved. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to select it. And by selecting it and clicking the plus button here, I'm going to overwrite this project, and that will update it with this camera that we've now added. So I'm simply going to click plus. It'll come up with this warning dialog, and this is just in case you accidentally made a mistake and you didn't want to overwrite. And the options are yes to overwrite, which is what we're going to use. We can either cancel, but if you actually said no, what will happen is it'll keep this project, and it'll actually make a new project here and ask you to name it. So effectively you'll have two projects. And if you want to do versioning, that's a very good way to go. But I wish to overwrite this scene, so I'm just going to say yes. And now the scene has been updated. And you can also see the thumbnail is updated too. It's basically taken a snapshot of our camera's view and produced a square thumbnail icon for us as a reference in the Content Manager. We've finished our first scene. We've done a simple, straightforward lock-off camera on a tripod and framed a shot of our warehouse.